questions. Right, question number 1 comes from Crimson Concerto. Never heard of that yo-yo canoe boy before. See what this guy writes. Dear J-Dog, what's up? What's up, Crimson Concerto? Did you know that no sadistic intent listening motherfucker, Metal Mickey, recently posted a video where he asks us to explain 90s death metal using 10 albums? I did not know that, Crimson Concerto, but you know what? J-Dog knows metal. He knows death metal especially. Deicide Mortician, Morbid Angel, the best ever. We're gonna talk about my top 10 90s death metal albums for all you alien poser boys out there. And Elcat, where's my sandwich? Alright, sorry to disappoint you, but you get Joe Dog instead. Justin had to go and wash his tights or something like that. I don't know. So up first is Massacre and their album From Beyond. And before I even begin to describe or tell you about the band, let's take a special peek at that price tag there. Yes, bought this almost 20 years ago for $7.98. Death metal just got deadlier, and indeed the prices got deadlier too. Look up this original press on Discogs. You'll find it going for about $150 to $200 per copy. Yeah. So Massacre then. A Floridian death metal band formed back in 1984, originally as a power speed metal band. They eventually evolved into a more thrashy and aggressive death metal band by the mid to late 80s. Their vocalist Cam Lee is often credited as being the first musician to do what is now considered a death growl or death grunt. It appeared on their 1986 demo, and for that they'll always be a very special part of death metal's history. But considering the fact that this album didn't come out until 1991, they were, in a lot of ways, kind of latecomers to that scene. I mean, Morbid Angel had already a couple albums, Autopsy, Death, Pestilence, yeah, they all had a couple albums yet. So, even though Massacre was sort of there at the very beginning and their influence is undeniable, they were a little late to the scene. So, From Beyond is probably best described as just straightforward death metal. It's meat and potatoes death metal, but it's very good. There's very strong riffs. Of course, you got Cam Lee's, low guttural barks and just killer guitars, great drumming, and it's produced rather well too. It's just a solid slab of straightforward early 90s death metal, and there's not a damn thing wrong with that. Highlights are like Dawn of Eternity or From Beyond. What's the other one? Biohazard's a really good one. I mean, it's a solid album. It's not a masterpiece. It's not something you need for every one of your collections out there, but it is a good, solid 90s death metal album. This next one is one of my all-time favorites. Originally released in 1993 by Relapse Records, it was actually recorded in May of 1991. The band we're talking about is Amorphous, and the album is The Privilege of Evil. Yeah, so this represents the most primal, darkest, evilest period of Amorphous, and obviously anyone that's followed Amorphous throughout the 90s or even today, they've changed considerably and are not even close to the band they were back in these days. Back in these days, it was just deep, dark, haunting, dirge-like death metal that ultimately had a huge influence on the Finnish scene and, to a lesser extent, other bands around the world too. But this is just awesome stuff. Just killer, pummeling, dark, wicked-sounding death metal that I absolutely love. And for what it's worth, this is probably what Abhorrence would have sounded like had they been, able to record a proper EP or, an album or anything. This is just that same sort of just really dirty, ugly, graveyard death-like, just doomy death metal that absolutely kills. Dismember, no comment needed. Alright, next we're going to talk about lucky death metal legends, Dr. Shrinker, and their compilation, Grotesque Wedlock. I know what you're thinking, compilation, is that fair to this video? Well, we're going to make it fair. Dr. Shrinker was a death metal band from Milwaukee, Wisconsin that existed from about 1988 to a 92-93 time frame. They were very well known in the underground due to the tape trading and probably their involvement in zines and all that kind of stuff as well. But they never released a full-length album during their original run, but just 3 demos which are very highly regarded. In fact, Entombed even thanks them in the booklet of Left Hand Path. No shit, you can look it up. So, Dr. Shrinker is a very interesting band because for the time frame that these demos were recorded, which is 88 to 1990, there was really no one that sounded exactly like this, not that I know of anyway. Dr. Shrieker played this sort of mid-paced, horror-themed death metal, which, going back that time period, they were probably one of the first, I'm not saying they were the first. Obviously, stuff like Necrophagia and even Cannibal Corpse was maybe doing it before that, but, they're kind of right there in that late 80s time frame with them. What makes this music really interesting is just, filled with tons of great riffs. It says this sort of almost sludginess to it at times, but still very death metal, a doomy kind of quality, and generally mid-pace, not a whole lot of blasting sections. And their vocalist, Rich Noonan, used this sort of this high-pitched, sort of shrieking voice, completely disregarding the rules of death metal or, death growls or anything. They called their music horrorcore, so I don't know how much they actually wanted to be associated with the death metal scene, but ultimately they are a hidden gem of the death metal scene and absolutely one I recommend strongly. Up next is a band and album I don't see a lot of people talk about, and that's a shame because this album absolutely rules. We're talking about Belial and their 1993 release, Never Again, although what I have here is a 2010 reissue. Although I implore you to look up the original, it absolutely rules. Anyway, Belial was a sort of Black Death hybrid band that is probably best compared to the early recordings of Impaled Nazarene. And interestingly enough, 3 of the members from this band would later play in Impaled Nazarene, but it's pretty obvious where they draw their influence from. And even like the vocalist, he uses that sort of weird, garbled, just bizarre voice that Mika Luttinen was using back in those old recordings too. It's remarkable, but I don't know if the band honestly set out to copy Impaled Nazarene or what, but the similarities are there. Although what I will say is, and as much as I enjoy early Impaled Nazarene, this just feels like a more fleshed out and just kind of mature version of that early Impaled Nazarene sound. And for that, I absolutely love it. The riffs are better, there's some keyboards and just some sort of untypical things. The intro has a sound that's very reminiscent of like old zombie movies from the 70s, and it's just, you just didn't see that kind of thing. Well, okay, you saw it in Entombed, Left Hand Pathos, but, there wasn't a lot of bands doing that back then, I guess, at least that I'm familiar with. So, a really cool intro, and then it's a really good, just melodic, but still, ferocious album that I really encourage a lot more people to check out. Belial, Never Again. Moving forward, we're going to go to Poland and talk about Vader's 1992 debut, The Ultimate Incantation. What can you say about Vader, man? Formed in 1983 as a power speed metal band, eventually in 1987 they decided on more of a death thrash style, and they've been consistent ever since. Almost certainly the first death metal band from Poland, and truly legends of not only their scene but the world in general. Vader, much like Massacre, has a history that goes back to the early 80s, and similarly it took them a while to get their first album out, and again that may have sort of hindered their early influence, but nevertheless, their Morbid Reich demo from 1990 was huge, so I guess a lot of people already kind of knew them at that point in time. But nevertheless, I love this album, and arguably their second album, De Profundis, is perhaps better, but I really like this. Again, it's just hard-hitting, very similar sounding death metal, but that underlying thrash quality to it, and just more just sort of a headbanging sort of desire within it and everything, and just, stronger riffs, really pummeling fast, intricate, tight drumming. I love this. Love the vocals, and kind of always loved the fact that, the vocals in Vader were a little more understandable. Not that I really care about, death metal lyrics or understanding them, but it was always interesting that he used a style that was more, you could actually kind of decipher what he was saying. I always thought that was cool, but yeah. Vader, you know him, you love him. Fucking great album. Up next is Hypocrisy and their 1990 debut, Penetralia. What can you say about Hypocrisy, man? Swedish death metal band going since 1991, formed by Peter Tentgren. Certainly one of the most legendary bands of the Swedish death metal scene, and yet, for a band that came out in the early 90s, they have a sound that is not typical Swedish death metal, but in fact more influenced by the American death metal scene. Stuff like Morbid Angel or Deicide feels like it bleeds through on this album, and especially on their first 2 albums. Really, it's pure death metal, but more American style, which I guess, considering every band from Sweden was trying to sound like Dismembered and Entombed at the time, that's kind of an achievement. But yeah, this is a solid album, very, just meat and potatoes again, just basic stuff, solid riffs, great drumming, and I always thought it was kind of interesting that Mace Broberg, who would later on go into Dark Funeral, was the vocalist on the first 2 albums. But yeah, obviously a legendary album, maybe not a masterpiece, but definitely another interesting artifact of the early 90s death metal scene. More finished death metal? Sure, why not? Let's talk about Funebre and their 1991 album, Children of the Scorn, although what I have here is the 2004 reissue. Funebre, along with Abhorrence, Convulse, and Demilich, are amongst the first finished death metal bands, and their influence is pretty obvious. Once again, we're dealing with very sort of dirgy, occasional doomy, but still technical and just morbid sounding death metal. You get a little bit of like that 80s, death metal, a thrashy kind of quality, but it's something a little more intricate. These guys were kind of really onto something, and it's really a shame they only made this one album, because this is a total hidden gem, much like the Belial stuff, and these guys deserve more credit than they really get, because you just get that nice fusion of just sort of that more, almost kind of Swedish sound, but then again kind of mixed with something kind of American perhaps, and then that already just kind of gloomy, dark sounding Finnish style that bands like Abhorrence and of course Funebre were making very popular in the early 90s in Finland. But if you've never heard this, highly recommend it. Children of the Scorn, Funebre. Alright, let's go to England now and talk about Carcass and their 1991 album, Necroticism. Again, what can you say about Carcass, man? Total legends. They formed in the late 80s, the grindcore band, and their first two albums are legendary in that scene, and obviously, they were one of the first to do that style, but then they moved in this more melodic death metal while still maintaining something of their past on Necroticism. They welcomed in young guitarist Michael Amat, who had just left the band Carnage, where they'd broken up, and took their offer, and together they made one hell of an album. The album has these samples from some medical documentaries sort of mixed between the songs, and it just has this really, I don't know, there's just nothing really like this that's, exactly like this in 1991. It has that more melodic but still brutal touch, and then, it has a little bit more of a cleaner production than, some stuff that was out there, but I really like this album. It's hard to describe exactly, but just, those, the sort of medical examiner lyrics and all that kind of stuff, and just, it's a great album. You've probably heard it, you know it, you love it. Carcass. Alright, one more, maybe it's an obvious one, but I had to talk about it. Entombed, Left Hand Path. Undoubtedly the most important band from the classic Swedish death metal scene. They originally formed in the late 80s as Nihilists and put out some incredible demos, absolutely astounding demos for their age, and just the influence it had on the Swedish scene and ultimately the death metal scene in general. In 1989, they turned into Entombed, and they released this masterpiece, and it's unlike anything else out there. It had that Sunlight Studio sound, which became notorious in, Sweden, and even other countries tried to emulate it. Everyone wanted to record with Thomas Skogsberg, and, but, even Dismember, as much as I love that album, it doesn't top this. There's something so, just this youthful energy and just this primalness too, and just killer riff after killer riff. Again, you gotta take into consideration, these guys were still teenagers or maybe 20 years old when this album came out. It's unbelievable the talent on display here. Again, you know it, I know it, I've known it for many years and you love it. What can you say? It's Entombed, it fucking rules. So, that's it, guys. Thank you for joining me here on Joe's Metal Mancave. Sorry I didn't mention Death or Morbid Angel. They didn't have any good albums in the 90s. That stupid, no sadistic intent, motherfucker! I'll show him what death metal is!